Welcome back to SteveDeace.com. Here I am, Steve Deace, and our daily diatribe today is going to answer a question from somebody that reads our website by the name of Dan Hepworth, who writes, "Dear Steve, I wasn't even aware Judge Roy Moore was running for president until I read your website on Tuesday. I'm curious, what do you think about him? What do you think about all of the various presidential candidates? Are you leaning one way or the other? Why or why not?" And Dan goes on to say, other than Herman Cain and Judge Roy Moore, he's really not that excited about any of the potential GOP presidential candidates. So Dan wants to know, where do I sit here today on, April the 20th, a full 8 months, 10 months before we actually have the caucuses in February of 2012. I'm not leaning one way or the other. I'm really not. You know, this time in the last caucus cycle, I wasn't leaning one way or the other either. In fact, in April of 2007, I had only met Mike Huckabee one time, and that was when I emceed the spring banquet a month prior for the Iowa Christian Alliance, and I had only met him in passing. I had not even begun to seriously vet the candidates, and I wanted to go back and point that out because the caucus cycle this go-around is much more delayed than it was in 2008. I think we have, 5 Republicans that have filed for an exploratory committee, which means they're going to run for president, with both the Republicans and Democrats having an open nomination in 2007. At this juncture in that cycle, we had 14 candidates that had filed. So even in that cycle, which was much more hurried than this one, I still hadn't figured out who I was going to support. I actually didn't get on the Mike Huckabee bandwagon in 2008 in that cycle until about a month prior to the straw poll. So with this cycle much more delayed in how it's developing compared to that one, I'm not even close to deciding who I'm going to support yet. And there are several reasons for this. Let me go ahead and list a few. Number one, really, other than the 3 so-called front-runners, I don't really know a lot yet about the rest of the candidates. I know more than I knew a few months ago, but that vetting process is really just beginning for me. So obviously we know a lot about Mike Huckabee. We know a lot about Sarah Palin, who I don't think is going to run. If I have a different answer on the given week about whether or not I think Mike Huckabee is going to run. This week I think he is going to run. The previous week I didn't. The week before that I did. The week before that I didn't. I've changed my mind on this based on who I've talked to probably about 5 or 6 different times. So right now I do think he's going to run, but he's not in the race yet. Sarah Palin I don't think is going to run. Mitt Romney I do think is going to run. He already is running, and we already know a lot about him, which is why there's no chance I would ever vote for him. So other than those 3, the rest of the field, I'm just beginning to know myself. So I want some time to vet all of these candidates. And that sort of gets me to the second reason that I'm not leaning one way or the other. And I think it's okay if you're not either. I mean, if you found the right candidate for you and you're morally convicted that this is what you're supposed to be doing, then God bless you. I won't stand in the way of that. I, however, believe that the smartest thing that I could do is to try to hold out for as long as I possibly can. And the reason for that is my worldview, like many of yours, is much more developed than it was in the last election cycle, the last presidential caucus cycle. I hadn't even read the Constitution cover to cover when we did this back in 2007. I probably hadn't read the Declaration of Independence all the way through since college. I didn't really even, I was a Christian. I thought I had a biblical worldview. I had no idea biblically what the scriptures have to say about economics. I pretty much had boiled my entire biblical worldview down to abortion and gay marriage. I didn't really have a biblical worldview on immigration, on national defense, on lots of different topics. I didn't even know what the separation of powers was. I thought when judges ordered you to do something, you had to do it. I believed in judicial oligarchy, judicial absolutism. Even though I didn't agree with it, I didn't like it. But like a lot of conservatives still to this day, I didn't like it. I rail against it, but I wasn't prepared to actually confront it or do something about it. So my worldview is a lot more in depth than it was a few years ago. Like many Americans, I've sort of undergone a civic revival in my own life. Rediscovering the wisdom of our founding fathers, for example. Wondering, for me as a Christian, the Bible is my framework. Does it have something to say on issues beyond abortion and gay marriage? And I have found that it does. So I've got questions now I want to ask these candidates that I would not have even known to ask 4 years ago. And I go back to what we did on WHO during the primary cycle of 2010. And we had a unique opportunity with the coalition of the willing, if you will, to really get a chance to know candidates in various races and really quiz them on the core of their worldview. And to this day, I've had so many people come to me and say what a great exercise that was for them. I've had numerous candidates that we interviewed in that series still tell me almost a year later that was so challenging. It helped them as a candidate. They had to answer questions they've never had to answer before and sometimes never even thought of themselves. And I would love the opportunity to do something like that again. I think it's both good for me as a voter, for you as a viewer, but then also for them as a candidate. Because I'm not so much concerned anymore about how a candidate fills out an issue survey, who endorses them, what they say their positions are. I want to know what their convictions are. Not just where do they stand, but why do they have that stand in the first place? And just as important, how do they plan on acting on that stand? Because there are a lot of candidates that can give you the right moral worldview, and they really mean it in their core because morally it is what they believe. But unfortunately, as we have seen far too often over the last decade or so, once they get into office, their application of their moral viewpoint, how they govern, is functionally no different than the liberals that they rail against. Or as I put it the other day was when I was on another radio program, I've found the biggest difference between Republicans and Democrats often is that Democrats don't do the things they have to do, and the Republicans often don't do the things they're supposed to do. Well, I want to find one in this caucus cycle that is willing to do the things he or she is supposed to do. And until I do, I'm not going to decide who to support. Thanks for joining us today at stevedeace.com. You can email me, steve@stevedeace.com, Stephen Deace on Facebook, and then follow me on Twitter, Steve_Deace. You have any questions like Dan you'd like me to answer right here on our daily diatribe, just email me and we'll definitely get to them right here on stevedeace.com. God bless.